talk about my favorite horror movie franchise and maybe my favorite movie franchise in general, Scream. And I'm going to talk about all 5 movies, pros and cons, which ones are my favorite, and rank them and why. Um, and this is just like a basic kind of surface level discussion about them. I'm not an expert on the movies by any means. I'm sure there are plenty because the movies have been out for like over 20 years. At least the first one has. And yeah, this is not one of those videos. This is just if you don't know much about Scream and you're thinking about watching the series, I'm going to tell you a bit about it. So, real quick, I'm going to state the order in which I've watched these movies and how that impacted my viewing of the next ones. So I didn't watch them in order because for some reason streaming platforms hate to put the first one on. They love to put the sequels. So the first Scream I ever watched was the second one, and then I watched the third one, and then I watched the fourth one, and then I watched the first one, and then I watched the fifth one. And the fifth one just came out earlier this year. So, I'll start with the original Scream 1. These are my pros and cons and general overview. So, the first Scream, I would say, is the most horror of all 5. All 5 have horror elements, but this one is it's much more serious than the other ones. So the Scream movies are known for being very meta. They reference a lot of horror cliches. And the characters discuss them as they go. So they'll remind you of a horror cliche and then it might happen, or things like that. And the first one really uses this as a element of suspense and less of humor. So it sounds a lot more menacing when they say, "Oh, in a horror movie, don't ever do this." And it's got a much more serious tone. Except the one great scene where the guy is watching the horror movie at the party, and he keeps saying "Look behind you," and the guy's coming up behind him. That's why I look behind me, just in case. We don't want to. I've watched a lot of Scream movies, so that was the funny horror that is carried on throughout the movies, where it's kind of it's still pretty scary, but it's more lighthearted, not serious, trying to manipulate situations using horror tropes. Because when say when the killers are saying it, then you're kind of yikes, what is their goal with this? You can tell that they're not just movie buffs, they're psychotic. And the first movie's villains have a much more threatening backstory, or motive. Matthew Lillard doesn't really have a motive. He just likes killing people, pretty much. Or he's helping out his friend. And then his friend, his backstory is sad, He's I'm seeking revenge because my family fell apart because of you, Sydney. And then you're kind of aw, man. And it's very violent and it's very scary. It's threatening scares, not fun jump scares where you're all in on the joke. Because with the meta things, you know, like they reference like classic horror movies and classic horror tropes. So like the audience and the characters are like in on it, and I like how that's carried out throughout the whole series, where like you know inside jokes already. Like it's not like I could come in and watch the second movie and be like, oh, I recognize that from this other movie, or um, like they let you in on the jokes and then use them to scare you. um, yeah, so first movie, I'd say it's a good movie, but if you're looking for like an actually scary kind of psychological thrillery movie with some jokes, I think you could go with the first one. Um, but since I watched all the other ones before it, I was not expecting that. I wasn't expecting it to be so serious. Because the second one, like, right off the bat's pretty funny. Like, they are in a film class in college, and then they talk about how sequels are never as good as the first movie. And I'm like, oh, this is gonna be fun. And I also just like things that are set on college campuses. I really like the idealized college thing. I feel like a lot of movies and shows really go for idealized high school, and I like I think it's interesting when they go with college instead, because they can like really use a lot of different settings, whereas like in a high school it's more like you go to class, you go home. But like in a college, when you go home you're still with the other students, and so you can do like a lot more with that, or like spend a lot more free time together, versus like in high school where you just like go back home to your parents. Plus all the actors are college age anyway, so like it makes a lot more sense. Anyway, I guess I'm transitioning into movie 2, Scream 2. Um, this one's fun also because Sarah Michelle Gellar's in it, and I'm a fan of Buffy. And then the guy, I don't know his name, I'm sorry. The guy who's in the Santa Clarita Diet is in it, and he's fun. I didn't know that he was in this movie because I just knew him from the Santa Clarita Diet, so I liked that. Um, yeah, the second movie I think is probably my favorite of the series. Um, the second one, I really like the fourth one too. The second one because it's like, it was the first one I saw, so I think that just like gives it a place in my heart of like, this is Scream. And then also because it's pretty funny, the jokes are pretty fun. I like the setting, like I said. And I like the mismatch of characters. Um, it's fun. So I also really like how in the Scream movies they are making movies based on the story of the first one. So, like, the characters are also seeing, like, oh man, they are making a mockery out of what happened to us. So, like, the whole time you're, like, along for the ride with the characters of, like, we watched the first one. Well, I didn't, but we watched the first one together, and that was horrible. And then you have to see, like, how the characters feel about that, like as if it like really happened, like as if these characters are in a world where horror movies exist, as opposed to like other horror movies where like the characters seem like completely like unaware that this is even possible, and then they don't even seem like to know or care like about patterns or like what to look out for. And so like sorry, I'm going back to the first one. But in the first one, right, like they reference the horror tropes, like Sydney is saying like I can't believe that anybody in a horror movie would just run up the stairs. Why don't they run out the door? And then like when the killer's in her house, then she's like trying to go out the door but she can't, And so then she runs upstairs. And, like, that is, like, I love the setup and, like, resolution that they have in these movies. Um, so, but in that case, it was more like, oh no, she knows what to do and she can't do it, you know? So it's like, it gives you, like, more anxiety and less like you're in on a joke and more like you're scared for the characters. um, but like in the second movie, it feels more because they also reference that they're making a movie about it and writing a book about it, and like they talk more about the environment of being in that movie. They kind of offset it so it's like, you know, it adds an extra layer of, oh, it's a movie. And people are reacting to a movie instead of reacting to a murderer in their house. I don't know. It's got like a different vibe though. It's like they realized what they were doing with the first one and liked the meta-ness and then pushed that along to make it more comedic and more fun for the audience instead of like a suspense thriller. And I can understand like if you really liked the meta suspense thriller that the first one offered, where like the characters were smart and capable and aware, and if you really liked that and the second one was more comedic, I could understand why you might not like the sequels. But I like the campiness that the meta elements allow, and that's why I like the Scream franchise. Um, Given that I watched most of the movies without knowing the first one, like all I knew was what they referenced in the other movies about, like, oh, remember when this happened to you? And then I'm like, I don't remember, but I trust you. Speaking of that, when I was making this preparation for this video, I was looking up like the third movie's plot and villain because I remembered who it was, but I didn't remember if there was two or just one. And I was reading about like his background, and I rewatched his reveal, the main or the only villain guy in the third movie, and that really kind of takes away even more from the first one than I thought it would. Like when I the third one was the second movie I watched, and I didn't think it was as good as the second one, but I still enjoyed it. Since it like took place on like a Hollywood movie set, it was less like fun, you know, because the second movie like took place on a college campus, and so lots of people could relate to like being on a college campus and watching horror movies with your friends, or like lots of people could relate to the first one because they went to high school and liked scary movies, and that ties into the fifth one, but and the fourth one. But the third one was like, we are making the movie, and so like even though it's fun that they run around a set of their neighborhood, that is fun. It's less fun for the audience because part of the meta elements is like, I watch horror movies, and I don't make Hollywood movies. I watch them, you know? So that kind of takes away from it. Plus, I felt like the villain's motive wasn't as good. In Scream 2, the spoilers, of course. In Scream 2, one of the killers is the mom of the killer in the first movie, and that is a callback to Friday the 13th, which is fun. You know, that's another element of meta that I think is fun. Plus, you know, he's related to the original plot, and they don't have to like shoehorn it in. Whereas, like in the third one, the guy reveals himself, and he's like, "I am your half brother," bum, 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 bum. And then Sydney's like, "Who are you?" And then he's just like, and also I inspired the first movie, and it's like, was that necessary? I felt like that kind of was like a cop out, where like they just kind of, he was just some guy that we don't know about at all, and they just made him related to the story, and then also made him inspire the story, which I think is weird because part of what was so scary about the first one was that like the people were like psychotic, and knowing that some guy outside of the plot inspired it makes it less scary almost, because like the first one was very intense, and then it just feels like the third one kind of backtracked on that, and you know, I don't really like that. I thought the third one was enjoyable, but it's definitely not my favorite. It probably ranks. Mm, well, I'd say that the first one is in its own category because the reason why I like the Scream movies is because of how meta and fun they are, and the first one is definitely not that. It's its own horror movie. So of the sequels, I'd probably rank it last. um, and then the fourth one. I thought the fourth one was a fun callback because I really like how Sydney and Courtney Cox. I'm gonna go back and forth between characters and actors' names as I remember them. I really like how they have the reoccurring cast that always comes back because it really like links you to the story, because it's like you grow up with them, you see everything they've been through, you see everything that they've accomplished, and then like that way they can keep building on the same plot over and over again. As you can see, I have not seen a lot of horror franchises, so I don't know if they do this in Halloween or the other movies, but in Child's Play they don't really do that, or in the Chucky franchise they don't really build. It's more like they build in the first three and then, but not like significantly really, besides like, oh man, this guy again. I mean, that's what the character says. The character is like, oh man, I have to deal with this doll again. Okay, sorry. um, but I really like how they keep bringing back the characters, so that way you can like get a more rich backstory in their life. And I like how they bring back the tropes. So like even if you're a casual movie fan or if you're a fan of the series, you can like be in on the jokes, right? Because they always ask like, "What's your favorite scary movie?" And then they like say like movie trivia. Um, and I like how they are all tied together in that way, and like you are anticipating it too, like it's like you're all in for the ride, you know. And the fourth one, I thought it was interesting because like the villain didn't have like a vengeful backstory. She wanted to be famous because of the fame of the movies, whereas like the other villains are like, oh, you wronged me, you know. So I thought that that was like a neat little new element that they added in. I thought that the scares in the fourth movie were more intense and like more thought out, and like it kept pulling you along where you're like, oh, it's over, oh, it's not over, oh no, this person, you know, like the twists were much more exciting and the production value was much higher, and um, you got to see like two generations of people, right? So like Sydney and her friends were like, maybe don't idealize this, like these movies, like you know the stab movies, like that are based on the first movie. Maybe don't idealize this situation because bad things happen. Maybe we shouldn't keep making books about it and movies about it because bad things happen. And these teenagers like they view it more as like a club and less as like a real thing that happened in the town. Whereas like Sydney is like, this literally happened to me. Maybe cool it. Maybe take it seriously. And they're like, nah. And I like that dynamic because it's really like, it brings you into it, right? Like if you see, like if you go through some kind of traumatic event and then somebody else is like, I can make money off of that. Like you feel that anguish, but also like the anguish of like, why is nobody taking this seriously? Like this is a big thing for me, and nobody seems to care. And like having that twist in the fourth movie of like her her niece being the killer, like her niece is like related to her, so like you would expect her to take the situation seriously, and she's the one being like, nah, I can milk this because I'm related to you. I think that's fun. I think